Well, once in a while, it's nice to talk about the Rays if they would ever win a game at Steinbrenner. This is now 10 out of 11 they're headed to their 10th loss in 11 games at Steinbrenner. As we
checks the notes, 2 hits.
Up to
2 hits.
Wow, they doubled it since the last time.
1 in the first and 1 in the 8th.
Jeez.
Couple walks mixed in, but
As soon as I found out that the Phillies were throwing a left-hander, I figured they had no shot, but I didn't know that they would get 1 hit through 7. You know, it's a really bad. It's not a great hitting team to begin with, but you throw a left-hander against these guys, you can check off the W, man. They struggle against lefties. That right-handed lineup is no bueno.
if I was playing the Rays and I had any lefties in my minors, I'd just call them up for that series.
Heck
man.
yeah. Didn't they do that? Didn't they have a spot starter, the Royals, the other day?
Yeah,
Something?
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I would just we need more lefties. Rays are coming up, more lefties.
Yeah. Just call down
Like
to the
more
farm.
cowbell, more lefties.
That's right. We mean more cowbell. Used to be a time when the Rays were about more cowbell. But, yeah, it's grim, man. It's not good. I apologize for my nasally voice. Nothing I can do about it. One of the worst summer colds I think I've ever had. That
It's going
aside,
around, man. I had that over the weekend.
did you? I think, and I can't pinpoint it, but you know how you get a feeling like I've not gone out in a crowd in a very long time?
Mm-hmm.
So the Lightning's last home game, which was about like last Wednesday, I think. I went to the arena. We were sitting on the glass.
Yep.
And everybody's screaming. And I swear to God, everything's coming cascading down and the germs are bouncing off the window and right at me or something. I don't know. I just feel like that's the way it happened because I haven't been in a crowd,
So it's either
before
that
or
or
since.
on airplane, same thing.
Yeah, and I haven't been on an airplane, so, or a gym or, we usually catch stuff. So thank you to the Lightning fans for yelling your way to my illness. But
Oh, it had to be the Panther fans that gave you the illness. I mean,
well,
come on.
that's true too. Yeah, stinking Panthers. Hey, it looks like they're going to go down, 2-0 to Toronto?
Yeah, right now as we're taping this, it's 4-3. The Panthers have pulled their goalie with a minute left.
All right.
So
Well,
not over yet, but
unless Toronto, folds like a wallet, which they have done before.
well, there's been a lot of that in this playoffs. There's been a lot of third period comebacks.
Yeah.
Stanley Cup playoffs. It's been incredible.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch. It's now official. Rays lose 7-0.
Yep, 2 hits is the final. So just like
Yeah.
So the Eagles over the Bucs 7-0.
7-0.
Got a touchdown.
Yep, got to improve the offense. Pretty good defense. Only 1 score. It was a tush push. That's sad, man. It's not going well offensively, and certainly not going well. It's not. I'm telling you, put the Yankee logos back up. Tear down all the signage. Make them
Do
fill
anything. Do something. Do anything. Like,
yeah, you have to do something. You got to break the slump here. It's not good. And they got, I think I saw where like 20 of their next 30 games are at home or something like that. Some shifty.
Really
thing.
that much? I mean,
Maybe not. I don't know. A bunch.
They've played a bunch at home already. So.
They have. I think they have a bunch more though. That's what I'm saying. In so many words.
Yeah, because they got a 9-game homestand coming up after this one. So
yeah,
6-9, so 15 out of 21.
15 out of 21. Okay,
No,
there you go.
Tonight was game 2 of that. So
okay. Yeah, so it's not good when this is your advantage if there is one, but I don't know. It's not a great club to begin with, but it's really bad when they play at Steinbrenner. Not sure why. Anyway, not a ton to talk about, but I did have a good day at One Buck Place, and credit the Bucs and Darcy Glazer in particular for starting this coaching academy, and they're sort of at the forefront of about their inclusion and the various minority hirings and they've had women on the staff and throughout the organization and things like that. So a year ago they came up with this idea to have their own coaching academy, and it's a big application process online, and they get lots of entries, and they have a kind of a board that filters it down, and it's kind of a video submission. Anyway, they came up with their list of I don't know how many guys they have, girls too. I think probably around 20 or so. And these folks come in and they're going to be able to work the rookie mini camp, which is this weekend. So they come in early in the week and they get these incredible access and forums that there's a complete buy-in by the organization. You had Jason Light and front office guys talking about what they do. Todd Bowles has talked about, being a head coach and how to set up work, practice and different things. And so on Wednesday, I went out there and got to hear what was a forum with Tony Dungy and Ronde Barber to start with in the afternoon. And that was about the coach player relationship. And man, you know, talk about a trip down memory lane. Trip down memory lane like you can't believe for me. And they saw me in the audience, like, Rick, you remember that? I was like, yeah. I'll just say this, like, in the timeline that I was around, and I started like in '90 with Ray Perkins, and then they went to Sam White after that, I believe, or Richard Williamson, then Sam White, and eventually Tony. But probably the best, I don't know, you call it like a Camelot time of the Bucs organization. And I wasn't there when they started winning in '79, through 80 something before Doug Williams was let go. But beyond that, it was really when Dungy arrived in '96. They had drafted Warren Sapp and Derek Brooks in '95. John Lynch came in '94, and then Tony arrived. And I believe it was '97 that Ronde Barber showed up. Of course, they kept adding, to the defense, and they told stories for about an hour, and I remembered all of them and lived all of them. But the takeaway I got from that was, you only win for the first time once, right? When there's been a long spell, I don't know what it was, 10, 12 years with double-digit losses. And then even when Tony got here, they were 1-8. They were 1-8. They did not start well, but you could see the improvement of the team. You kind of had confidence, Tony was going to be consistent and do the same things and make this team better. And then I think they won maybe 5 out of the last 8 games, and they went 6-10. But they had started to, the arrow was pointed up, and then the next year they got off to a hot start. Well, let's say they were like 4-0. They're on the cover of Sports Illustrated. They beat the Dolphins, and they wind up, going to the playoffs and beating Detroit at home. It was the first, I think, home playoff game in 18 years, and that was just an incredible time to be a Bucs fan. I know a lot of people that listen to this podcast remember that, but just the stories, which I have written about in the past and will write again. This is their 50th anniversary, but it really brought a lot of things home. And, I think a lot of it had to do with Dungy and just his whole, the whole way he got hired was not almost an accident in some ways, but you got to credit Malcolm Glazer. They were big game hunting, they were new owners and they were trying to get Steve Spurrier. And I think they offered the job to Spurrier, and he went to bed and slept on it and decided to stay at Florida, because I like the Buccos, but, I'm happy at Florida. And so then they went after Jimmy Johnson, who was, had been let go or quit in Dallas, depending on your perspective. And he ended up choosing the Miami Dolphins and Dan Marino, right? Sounds solid. Would you rather have Trent Dilfer or Dan Marino? So he goes to Miami, and Tony was legit their third choice, and at that time, I think there might have been one other African-American head coach in the league. I don't know if it was Ray Rhodes or somebody like that. But he had the year before, they had the number 1 defense in Minnesota, and he was the coordinator. He had like 8 interviews. He didn't get any of the jobs, right? And so the next year, he was telling the story like he went to for one job, and the owner was like, hey, you do a really good job on defense and this, that, and the other. He says, but, I just notice, how are you going to talk to the players? Because you're just so quiet and, you're soft spoken and, you'll never survive as a head coach in this league if that's what you do, And so he didn't get these jobs. And then when Tampa came up, he didn't know anybody down here. Like, other places he had connections with, this assistant coach or somebody in the front office. But when he came down here, he ended up interviewing 3 times. And he told the story where Malcolm Glazer, kind of asked him about his style. And Tony said, well, I don't think you have to scream and yell and, sort of dog cuss these guys to get your point across. And Malcolm said, you know what, that's how I parent my sons. That's how I relate to my kids. And so he hired him. And at the time it was a big hire, to get an African American coach, and Dungy was well known. Um, but it was just, it was fun to go see the relationships, and you know the Q&A that they did with Casey Phillips. And man, I was thinking those guys in the audience that are all young coaches themselves. Some coach high school, some into college. Robert Ayers, who played for the Bucs, so I think was a first or second round pick, is now an assistant coach, D-line coach at Tennessee. He's in this program. Um, and there were young women too. But it struck me that time was really the best time for Bucs football since the 79 82 era. And it lasted for quite a while. Of course, it morphed into Tony being fired in 2001, John Gruden coming here in 2002, and then on to present time. They did go through a dry spell. The end of Gruden. I think I don't know, between Gruden and maybe Bruce Arians or whatever, they had 5 coaches in 10 years. But now, of course, they're been consistent. They've been in the playoffs 5 straight years. They won 4 NFC South titles. But I was talking to Dungy, and here's a guy that's in the Hall of Fame, right? Pro Football Hall of Fame, and won the Super Bowl as a coach with the Colts and all that. But when I was talking to him afterwards, he told me something that I kind of surprised me. Like, we were talking about '97, and what that stadium was like. It was the old sombrero, right? As Chris Berman would say, and they packed that place right after they started winning. People were so proud of the team, and of course they had the Glazers had changed the colors. They were now the pewter pirates and all that, and there wasn't a seat available anyway. It was a tough place to play. Defense was great. And they completely changed the culture, changed the perception, and got into the postseason, beating Detroit, as I mentioned. I remember standing on the field with Paul Gruber, who had been here forever and didn't win anything, and this was towards the end of his career. And he's just standing there looking at these fireworks as everybody was. It was sort of surreal in a way. And when I asked Dungy about that time, he told me, he said, to this day, that was my favorite year in coaching. Now think about that, right? Think about all the success he had, and even with the Bucs, they went to the NFC Championship game and lost, in St. Louis in '99. Um, but that year, because it was the first time of winning, and all the guys that they had at that time, and many of them stayed, for many many years as a core of that team and won a Super Bowl. I thought that was neat. I thought it was really cool to hear him say that because, he's had a lot of coaching experiences since he left here.
Well, you don't think about that. I mean, we know how hard it is to repeat at anything.
Sure.
And, they always say once you get that taste of it, you
Uh-huh.
want more.
Yeah.
But that first one, you'll never beat that. I mean, it's the culmination of your life's work, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're coaching or playing the sport. I mean, you've been presumably a part of it since you were a kid. If you're a coach, or even longer along the way, if you hadn't won.
Yeah.
And you finally reach that pinnacle. You finally hoist that trophy, become the best. We're the best team. Like, what you've been working at since you were 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever. Like that first one, you don't think about it that way, but man, and look, you see when players for the first time hoist those trophies, that look of relief on their face almost.
Yeah. Well, you only win for the first time once, right? And of course, you want to win again, but that first time, I think, is a feeling like no other. And for a franchise that had been so down for so long, to see it go from where it was when he got here, which was very small crowds, and I think his first game they got beat 34-3 to the Green Bay Packers and Brett Favre, um, and then to see where it ends up. Now, of course, he didn't get to be with them. He was fired after the 2001 season, and John Gruden came in, and they won the Super Bowl with many of the same players, certainly the same defense. But he built it, and John deserves the credit for winning the Super Bowl and the things he did on offense and the players he brought in. Uh, but then, just listen to Ronde Barber, who didn't play at all as a rookie. Here's Ronde Barber out of Virginia, and we look at him now and see his Hall of Fame career, and the guy played, like, I don't know, 16 seasons or something like that. I mean, it's incredible how long he was at the top of his game, and for him not to even be able to play as a rookie, he just wanted to get on the field. Um, and to see him now, there's sat two Hall of Fame players, and we've had a bunch of them from that era. But just what he needed as a player from the coach, and the coaches he had, Herm Edwards, and then Mike Tomlin, and Mike was just starting out. You think about Mike Tomlin now; he came here as I think he was in his 20s or very early 30s, if that. Out of the University of Cincinnati, he was a college coach, and took over guys like Ronde Barber who weren't much. They were a little bit younger than him, but not a whole lot, and challenged him to be a better player. And they had so many great coaches on those staffs that came through here, but Barber just always wanted to find ways to get better. Like, and I think there had such good coaches on that staff. And then you have to let your coaches coach. You can't micromanage things. There's a lot going on, and I think hiring a staff is really important, but also letting them do their jobs. And Tomlin was very detailed oriented. I mean, by the time Mike got here, some of those guys have been a couple Pro Bowls. But the first practice, he's got a line drawn on the field, and they're backpedaling right on that line, right? Like that had to be the path. They wanted to be precise, and they wanted to get the steps down and have a straight back pedal and that stuff. And it got to be habit where they would never go to practice and do that drill without a line sitting there, and it just got to be, really cool listening to him talk. Now, the one story I'll share that Tony shared, which I thought was unexpected. He talked about coaching and the rewards you get from it, not financial or anything like that, but just impacting players' lives. He had a text message that was 18 years old. He'd kept it in his phone. Imagine several phones, but he pulled it out. I forget where he was at some coach's thing, and it was from a player he actually cut. And I factored into this story because it was Lamar Thomas. I don't know if you remember the receiver from the University of Miami that they drafted pretty high. I think it was like a second or third round pick.
Mm-hmm.
And he played with Horace Copeland and, some really good, University of Miami teams down there. And Lamar, as Tony said, you try to impart these guys, try to impact them on and off the field, but you have to do certain things. You have to be responsible and, act a certain way. And it's not just about football. His first meeting, he told them, if we win and we don't impact the community, we've lost. Like, it's more than just football. You guys have to, do certain things. And there was a 4th of July, and Lamar was in Miami when he was playing for the Bucs, and he got into a domestic situation with his then, I think, girlfriend, Ebony Cooksey. I'll never forget that name. And anyway, she was pregnant, I think, and ended up going through, after a tussle, through a sliding glass door. And so he was arrested. It was an awful, scenario when you look back on it. And we started digging into, public records and things like that. And there was this one record, which was rare. It had a little code. You can look and see how many emergency vehicles are called to a specific address. If I wrote my address down and there were emergency vehicles for whatever, could be an alarm went off or, whatever it is. There was a little code, and I looked it up, and it said Baker Act. I was like, whoa. Like, they went out there and somebody was Baker acted. Well, it was Lamar. And in the file, was a suicide note. And, he was in a bad place. He was depressed, all that stuff. Well, when Tony realized how the gravity of this guy's situation, the first thing we did was, before I printed the story, I let the Bucs know about it and all that. And Tony made the hard decision to release the guy. First they made sure he was, had support and people around him. And he eventually got picked up by Jimmy Johnson and with the Hurricanes after that. And he came back to Tampa the next fall to play in the preseason against the Bucs. But Lamar wrote him this letter, and it was really impactful. I can't do it justice, but it was about, how grateful he was that Tony had released him, and not just released him, but did it in a manner in which, he told him, why he was doing it and what the expectations he had for him, and how he wasn't going to turn his back on him just because he wasn't a member of the team. And, just sort of what he thought Lamar could do with his life and his career, and that this was not, the end, but it was an opportunity to try to learn from it, etc. And Lamar related all of this and said, "You saved my life. Like that decision, uh, that wake up call, if you will, and the way you did it, actually saved my life." And I'm not doing the letter justice, but it was impactful, to think that even with a player that you release, um, you can still have an impact on somebody. And Lamar's done great since. I think he's coached ball and done different things, broadcasting and whatnot. That was a cool story. I enjoyed that one. I'll get to more of my little day at One Buck Place. Also had a visit from, I'll tell you what, man, John Gruden was out there coaching it up, as they say. So we'll get to that in just a minute. Hey, have you guys been down to International Plaza Mall? I'm sure you have. But have you been to Breitling Boutique? They're our sponsors, but more than that, the Breitling company has been making the best Swiss watches in the world for about 145 years or so. And they've been in International Plaza Mall for the last 5. Okay, so you go into the mall, the center area upstairs, you're going to go to their store, and the first thing you're going to notice is just their customer service. It's second to none. I mean, they're used to dealing with, NFL players, Major League Baseball players, celebrities, but they're going to treat you just the way they treat all of them. Go in there, take your time, have a drink, learn about these beautiful watches, the chronomats, the Navitimers, all of that. They've also got women's watches, sports watches in particular. These things are durable. If your wife or girlfriend's like mine, she's on the go all the time, they're going to hold up, and they're absolutely beautiful. They have all kinds of different colored wristbands for her. It's Breitling Boutique, International Plaza Mall. And if you go there, check out the NFL collection. They have all 32 teams have a team watch celebrating the NFL's 104th year anniversary while supplies last. So that's the key phrase here. If you go on our website, you're likely to see an ad with the Bucs team watch. It's stunning. It's got the team colors on the face, the logo, all 32 teams while supplies last. It's Breitling Boutique, International Plaza Mall. Make sure you tell them that you heard about it right here on Sports Day Tampa Bay. So if John Gruden had a cold, he'd sound like me. I'll tell you what, man. I've never done John Gruden with a cold, but that's the way it sounds.
Not 2 times.
Yeah, that's right. He did that. You know what's funny? He did that. So we're in the bleachers, or the the coaching academy people were, and John brought his screen. We're in the indoor facility, and we're in the bleachers, metal bleachers. And normally John goes, "Knock on wood if you agree with me," and people would knock. He's like, knock on whatever it is you're sitting on if you agree with me. It was like aluminum benches, Um, but he did that, and he was on fire as usual. You get him in front of a board, or in this case, a screen. He had his clicker, right? He had his film from the FFCA, man. I think Barstool was there filming him, and he started with the cadence, you know, like your cadence. How do you guys call cadence? How you call plays? How you call plays? What's your snap count in college? And the guy claps his hands. That's what they do in college now. He goes, if I ever see that in the NFL game, you know, he was just he just hates that, and he taught them how to do a cadence and how it's got to be consistent, and all that stuff. And so he drilled them on that. And then he had his archive of film is second to none. I mean, he had film of him coaching Pittsburgh. I don't know how young he probably was, but maybe barely in his 20s. Might have been a receivers coach, I think, at Pitt. Um, film of Jerry Rice running down guys, 40 yards down the field to throw blocks for, John Taylor. I mean, it was incredible. and taught them a bunch of plays, and not just spider two white banana. You know what I mean? It was a bunch of plays, and then they were going to go out. He goes, "We're out here. We're going to run a couple plays. I want you guys to know where you got to go. This call here, you got to be there." And he went over the plays and where they were supposed to be. And then they went out on the field. They went out on the field and they did kind of a walkthrough, if you will. And I'm telling you, man, I'm sitting there and I'm going, God, what a cool thing, for a young coach starting out, some in high school, some in college, some from Europe that are doing American football over there, some that want to go into front office and not coaching. But this academy thing, and I think they placed one young woman with, I want to say, the Washington Commanders or Carolina, I don't know, one of those organizations last year from this academy. So, you make the connections, you make the contacts in the NFL. You've got, the recommendations from this club. Like, it's really a valuable thing. And it's all sort of done by, it was really if you will, I think Darcy Glazer was spearheaded this, and she was there. And it's just really, it's one of those things I think that the Bucs, they won't get credit for it or anything, but nor do they want it necessarily. But it's something that's impactful. And I know this, those coaches went back much better coaches than when they got there. Like, much better. Like, until you're in the NFL, until you see how much time is spent in meetings and then walkthroughs and then practice, um, and then you do it all over again the next day, and the precision that you require. Professional football is just that. There's so much at stake, and there's so few players that get to play, and so few coaches, and everything is heightened, and everything is important. And I think for people to be in the building and feel that is really unique. And I was just sitting there going down memory lane, like every now and then Ronde or somebody go, "You remember that, Rick? You remember this? You remember that?" And yeah, I do. I've been fortunate to, to sort of have this sort of window into an organization that has kind of morphed, from really tough times and 12 years of losing seasons into the Dungy, the Gruden years, and then kind of tough times again, and Raheem Morris and Greg Schiano and Lovie Smith and such, Dirk Cutter, and then finally Bruce Arians arrives, and then Todd Bowles, and now they're kind of back, in the winning mode again. In fact, they've made the playoffs 5 straight years. They won 4 NFC South titles in a row. That's never happened in this organization, even when Tony and John were coaching. So I've had a good window seat to all of this, and it was good to see all those guys back. So, all that stuff with Gruden, I know he's going back in the Ring of Honor, but for him to actually participate, in the coaching academy, I thought was pretty cool.
You brought up practice, and I saw this on Wednesday.
Yep.
It was the 23rd anniversary of Allen Iverson's press conference.
We're talking about, man, we're talking about practice. I know, not the game I love. I know it's important. I do, man. What we talking about practice, man? What we talking about, man? We're talking about practice.
23 years.
I think he says it 23 times, too.
He might, yes.
It's hilarious. It's still one of the best sound bites ever, because it was poignant to the fact that, like, yeah, he's right. They're talking about practice, and he was a gamer. I know it's important, man. I do. I'm not saying it's not, but what are we talking about, man? We talking about practice?
Which is the exact opposite of guys like Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant.
Right.
Who would destroy you in practice.
Oh, yeah. No, they look forward to it.
They didn't care if it was practice or a game. Whoever's opposite them, they're going to destroy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you remember, the Jordan, movie or whatever, 10-part series or whatever it was.
Yep.
Boy, that showed that, like he went after people on his own team, and challenged them in ways that they had never been challenged. But yeah, they treated everything like a personal attack, and that's what made him great. But yeah, Iverson was still, whether he cared about practice or not, pound for pound, that was one of the toughest guys I've ever watched play in the NBA. Like, he was, as John would have said, he's a ball of butcher knives, man. Like, he got after it, and no bigger than a minute, and went in the trees and he was fearless.
How small he was. He was. Oh. You might be right. Pound for pound, maybe the toughest player ever in the NBA.
Unbelievable and relentless. And there was a time early in his career, we were playing in Chicago. The Bucs were. We were. Like, I play on the team. No, I don't. The Bucs were playing in Chicago, and we got the hookup, as they say, because the ownership had access to some Chicago Bulls tickets. It was opening night against the Philadelphia 76ers with Allen Iverson and Jerry Stackhouse, both of them really young players. I
Wow.
don't think it was a rookie year, but it was close to it. And the best thing about it was, since it was opening night, the Bulls the year before had won their third straight NBA title. This is before Jordan ends up, leaving and taking his little hiatus to play baseball. And so they were giving out replica championship rings. The Lightning have done this. Lightning's was beautiful, by the way. We got one of those the last time. But we go in the arena, my friend and I. We'd never been to the United Center or a Bulls game at that point. I might have been to one in Chicago when they had the old stadium. But so we go in the United Center. We're behind one of the goals. And, it's like the first, I don't know, 10,000 people or whatever. So we got these rings. And I felt so bad. These season ticket holders were behind us. And they're like, did you got a ring? Are you from here? I was like, no, man, we're from Florida. Oh, man. And we were just interlopers. It's like we walked away with the jewelry. I think like Jordan went for like 24 that night. Iverson probably about the same, and the Bulls won. But that was the night they presented the Bulls with their championship rings from their third championship. So it was cool.
By the way, one quick note before we get out too.
Yep.
George Pickens traded to the Cowboys.
Yes, he was.
For a third rounder, and then I think swapping fifth and sixth round picks.
Swap picks and six,
year.
yeah.
Not next year, but 2 years from now.
Yeah, 2026.
Interesting.
Well, it makes Dallas relevant again. Look, they've been, Jerry's been, they're going to make some dynamic trades. We're going to do some dynamic. And Jerry hasn't done much with that club in a while, and they just have been sort of irrelevant. And that's the worst thing you can say about the Cowboys because no one thinks they're irrelevant, least of all them. But they've been irrelevant. Like, it's the same movie every year, Every year, watch out for the Cowboys. This is the year they're going to go back to the Super Bowl and all that. And they never do. And, wash, repeat, right? And you re-sign your quarterback and you lose a receiver here. But, Pickens, like I was looking at his numbers. Now, I don't think Mike Tomlin wants to deal with diva wide receivers. He's already cut, like DeAndre Johnson and, of course, Antonio Brown. Pickens is not a bad locker room guy, but he's very demonstrative when things don't go right on the field. Like he lets everybody know he's miserable. But he's down to 1 year in his contract, and there's not, the promise necessarily of an extension when he was traded. So Dallas could have him 1 year. They could do something, with him. But what he gives them is another receiver next to CeeDee Lamb, and that changes that offense. You have to have two. And so, Pittsburgh loses kind of a pain. Now, we were talking about this on the radio show. It was like, so does this mean Aaron Rodgers is not going to go to the Steelers? They got DK Metcalf, in the offseason. And now you let Pickens go. But in reality, they may sign, one of Aaron Rodgers' old Jets.
I was going to say, you can
receivers.
Always trade for somebody else or sign one
Absolutely.
of his old receivers.
Yeah, he can bring in one of his own. I
don't think this has anything to do with Aaron Rodgers. I think this has everything to do with Mike Tomlin didn't want to re-sign Pickens. He's got 1 year left.
Yep.
So let's get something for him.
Get some value, get a third-round pick, and swap fifth and sixth, and, get something from him. So I agree. There's another theory, and I like this one too. The reason Aaron Rodgers hasn't signed yet, and he said he only wants $10 million, right? But the reason he hasn't signed yet, this is a theory, is that the NFL is going to announce their schedule on May 14th. If he signs now, a la Brady announcing he's unretired, there's a chance that the NFL saddles Pittsburgh with about 6 national TV games. You're playing Sunday night, Monday night, Thursday night. But if they wait until the schedule comes out, much more advantageous. They'll still have national TV games, but maybe not as many. I don't know if that really matters to Aaron Rodgers necessarily, but to a football team, it could.
I just thought maybe his agent hadn't presented him a contract yet because he wants a bigger contract than $10 million for the agent fee.
Probably. I can't believe he went on McAfee and said he'd take $10 million. That was crazy. Because that's where your offer is now, man.
No, that's what your offer is, except, you're not under oath there. It's like you
No,
can say
that's
whatever you
true.
want, really.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe he would play for 10 million. Said he would, but I just think
But he's
that's
made $360 million in his career. It ain't like,
yeah. No one's going to hold a telethon, but I'm just saying,
yeah.
if he wants to play, he'll play. If he doesn't, he won't. But Pittsburgh did nothing at the quarterback position, so they're either going to, kind of just go through the year and hope that maybe next year they'll be in a better position to draft one, or indeed maybe he will come and play. I still don't believe he's retired. He hasn't announced anything, although he says it's an option. That's just more Rodgers wanting the drama. And
Tom Brady announced he was retired and then came back, so it doesn't
Yeah,
really matter whether
exactly.
you announce anything anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, until they kick it off. But yeah, I think it's just him, being dramatic and doing whatever he does. But I could see him and Tomlin actually. I know they have a lot of mutual respect. Like they've been competed against each other. They met, and actually, I could see Mike doing that for a year. I could see him saying, "Okay, you know, we're going to have to develop some guys, and maybe next year we're in a better position to draft. But let's see if we can, stretch our winning record into the postseason, and if this guy can stay healthy, and if he can numerically, like if you just look at his numbers, he didn't have a bad year last year, but he's at the end. He's at the end of the journey, and but again, you didn't re-sign Justin Fields. He ends up moving on, and so he's with the Jets now. Why not? Take a flyer and see if even though he doesn't feel like a Pittsburgh type, Steelers type quarterback. But there's no question they haven't really had one since Ben left. So I can see that happening. I still believe that's going to happen. I do. I don't know why it hasn't happened yet, but I do believe it's still going to happen. This just in, Panthers are down 2-0 to the Toronto Maple Leafs. So
they haven't lost a home game yet, though. So series
Yeah.
not over by any means.
No, and they're not done knocking people out. Trust me, anything can happen. But and Toronto also has a bit of a history of not finishing things. So we'll see if they can get it done. But a good start by the Maple Leafs anyway. The Rays will continue to try to avoid the sweep of the Phillies. And then next in town, who they got coming next?
The Brewers.
It's the Brewers. That's right. Yeah, and it's another tough club. So I don't know what's going on at Steinbrenner, but it's not good as far as their home cooking. They've now lost 10 out of their last 11 games at their new home, if you will. Not going the way I predicted, which shows me that I can't predict anything. Don't ever ask me, what do you think will happen? Because whatever I say, do the opposite. I thought they would be excited about playing outdoor baseball in Tampa, at this field. And I couldn't be more wrong. I think they hate playing there. They've just not had much success. So we'll see if they can get it going in this last, series or so. So yeah, we'll be back tomorrow. Make sure you see our friends at Breitling Boutique, International Plaza Mall. Check out all their beautiful watches, including the NFL team watches, all 32 teams represented there in the 104th year anniversary of the NFL. And let them know that you heard about it on Sports Day Tampa Bay. For Steve Versnick, I'm Stroud of the Tampa Bay Times. Have a great day, everybody.